RFK Jr.'s long-awaited dietary guidelines just dropped, and I gotta say, it's a lot better than I expected. So we'll go over the good, we'll start positive, everything they got right, then the surprises, of which there were many, and finally we'll talk about the not so good, things that could have been done better. The main theme of the guidelines is eat real food. So avoiding highly processed foods, avoiding kind of junk foods. This is a good message in general. It's the main problem with the American diet. In reality, it's a little more nuanced. There are some ultra-processed foods that are really bad and some that are not so bad, maybe even healthy. But in general, it's a good message. There's a lot of focus on reducing refined carbohydrates and added sugars, which is good. It's the right idea. Of course, RFK Jr. contradicts this message all the time with photo ops in junk food joints and constant posts advertising junk food, Coca-Cola, and candy anytime they change one ingredient, which is terrible messaging. But leaving aside all of that, just looking at the guidelines as presented, I think it's a good general message. They also recommend more protein than previous guidelines. The RDA is 0.8 grams of protein per kilo of body weight, but they're actually recommending between 1.2 and 1.6. I don't have a problem with that. There's some evidence to support this, and this is closer to what Americans are eating anyway. The average protein consumption in the US is around 1.2, 1.1. So this comes closer to what Americans are already doing. In addition to the protein, they also recommend 3 servings daily of vegetables, 2 servings of fruit daily, and 2 to 4 servings of whole grains. For cooking and added fats, they recommend olive oil with butter or tallow as alternatives. Now, in reality, for health, we wouldn't really mention butter or tallow in the same breath as olive oil. They're not in the same league, but at least they put the olive oil there as the first option. That's better than I expected it was going to be. And then the last section of the guidelines talks about specific diets. They say people with certain diseases may benefit from lower carbohydrate diets. They also talk about vegetarian and vegan diets and how to design those, consuming protein-rich foods, limiting processed foods, supplementing if needed. All of this I found pretty reasonable. Okay, let's go over the surprises. Most of RFK's fixations that he's become famous for were basically dropped in the end. So one of his obsessions are seed oils. They're poison, they're killing everyone. They're not mentioned in these guidelines, not once in the document that's designed for the public. There's additional documentation in the website that goes over linoleic acid and all these issues, but the document that is meant for most people to look at, seed oils are not mentioned once. Not encouraged, not discouraged, just ignored. It's a little strange because it's one of the main sources of fat in the American diet, if not number one. So you have to tell them something. Is it healthy? Is it not healthy? You have to provide some guidance. Obviously, it's implied that they're not recommending it because they don't mention it at all and they recommend other sources of fat. So it's implied, but it's strange to not mention it at all since it's a common food. By the way, this framework of theirs, eat real foods, and they include olive oil and butter, which are not unprocessed, but they're not ultra processed either. They're somewhat processed foods, but cold pressed seed oils are just as processed as extra virgin olive oil. Cold pressed oils have no heat, no hexane added. So one gets what they're trying to do, but it's not really scientifically consistent to recommend butter and olive oil and not talk about cold pressed seed oils, which are just as processed as these foods. Another big surprise was saturated fat. This is another thing RFK has talked about in the past. They gave press conferences talking about how saturated fat was unfairly demonized, all this influencer rhetoric. In the end, they completely backpedaled. They give the same saturated fat cutoff that we've had for many years, under 10% of calories from saturated fat. And it's really weird because RFK just gave a press conference to release the guidelines where he said again, we're ending the war on saturated fats.
We are ending the war on saturated fats.
You're upholding the same cutoff. What are you ending? If there was a war on saturated fats before, you're waging the same war. It's the same cap. So there's a lot of lip service, and this is vintage RFK. He says one thing in a press conference, says something else on social media, and then he says something else in a document. Another RFK fixation was raw milk, and that's not mentioned in the guidelines. They don't mention pasteurization either. Again, they just kind of skirt the issue and talk about dairy but don't specify. I think this was a general strategy. Ideas that are really wacky and don't match the science, they just left it aside. They just took the non-committal approach. Dairy alternatives like soy milk, which are increasingly popular, more and more people are not consuming milk for different reasons, intolerances and others. Those are not mentioned at all. It's like those foods don't exist. And then salt, they also maintained the cutoff that we've had for a while, under 2,300 milligrams a day of sodium recommended. All right, let's talk about the things that were not so good that could have been done a lot better. The main image that they used is an inverted pyramid. Every edition of the guidelines has a visual that represents the guidelines. The previous edition had MyPlate. So the pyramid has an advantage over MyPlate, which is that it shows the actual foods. MyPlate just showed these sections. You want to show people the actual foods. That's more intuitive. That's how people eat. But pyramid is not the best shape to represent dietary guidelines. It's not intuitive. We don't eat in pyramids. We eat in plates. And we've already gone through this. We used to have a pyramid way back. It was discontinued 15 years ago. We evolved to a plate. Now they're going back to a pyramid. It just feels like a step backwards. Honestly, this inverted pyramid feels a little bit like a middle finger to that old pyramid that we dropped a while back. But I think these national guidelines for health should be based on what's best for the population. It shouldn't be some kind of old grudge. The gold standard remains the Canadian image. Shows all the foods in sections. It's intuitive. You grasp it immediately. You really can't beat it. Okay, one good thing about the inverted pyramid is it's very simple. It has 3 sections. First section's protein, dairy, and healthy fats. A little weird to be lumping all this in one section, but okay. Second section, vegetables and fruits. And then third section, whole grains. Now, one problem that a lot of people noted is there's a lot of inconsistencies between the image, the graphic, and the text. So saturated fat, for example, the text gives a specific cutoff for saturated fat that is pretty strict. The image does not represent that. The image features a lot of foods high in saturated fat. So I ran an example day with the serving sizes and the serving numbers that they provide in a table, and I was pretty careful. I chose steak with no visible fat, I chose skinless chicken, and I put half the added fats as olive oil. It wasn't even all butter, and it still blew over that cap of 10%. I'm not even a big fan of the 10% cap for most people, for the general population, because I don't think it's intuitive. This is not how we put meals together. I think if you choose health-promoting foods, the individual nutrients take care of themselves. But this is just inconsistent. You give one threshold in the text, and then the image is something else. It feels like different teams of people made different parts of the guidelines, and it doesn't quite fit together. Okay, when it comes to protein, also some inconsistency here. Scientifically, what we see is benefit of fatty fish, seafood, fermented dairy, and plant protein. You see that over and over and over again. The text is much closer to that. It lists all kinds of proteins. The image doesn't really reflect the science, highlights these big pieces of meat, big slab of red meat, more red meat next to it. You have to squint to see the plant protein at the bottom. So the image doesn't match the text, and it doesn't match the science. I think it's pretty clear that there was a conflict between RFK Jr.'s personal views and kind of the influencer worldview on one hand, and then the science on the other. And the text went closer to the science, and the image, the graphic, is closer to kind of the MAHA and the RFK ideology. Then we have the alcohol issue. The previous guidelines had a specific cutoff. That's gone. These guidelines just say drink less alcohol, but drink less is too vague. It's not quantitative, right? It's easier to game, and this could be a problem. And finally, we have the issue of funding. RFK dismissed the entire advisory committee that was in place when he came in, that was composed of some of the top nutrition experts in the country. He was very dismissive of the long report they wrote. He said it sounded like it was written by the food industry. That's his thing, right? Everything is corporate capture, everything is industry interests. Okay. So he put together his own committee, but most of the members that they handpicked have financial ties to the food industry, and most of those have ties with the beef and the dairy industries, as several news pieces have been pointing out. Personally, I don't even care that much about funding. I think you can evaluate the work on its merits, regardless of who funded it. But you have to be consistent. If your whole platform, your whole spiel is corporate capture and you point fingers at every industry tie, you have to be consistent. Otherwise, it feels like industry funding only bothers you if it doesn't agree with your personal preference. The guidelines even open with a letter from RFK that says, "We are realigning our food system to support farmers, ranchers, and companies who grow and produce real food." That's not a conflict of interests. I want the guidelines to say what's best for health for people, according to the science, period. Not what's best for the farmers and the ranchers. And to be fair, this isn't just RFK. This is a USDA problem. It's institutional. But RFK only points to industry problems if it's big pharma, big sugar, or big seed oil. If it's big supplement, big beef, or big dairy, he doesn't see it. That's just hypocritical. We got to treat all industries the same. Bottom line, are these recommendations better than the standard American diet, what most Americans are eating? Absolutely. Is this likely to make a big difference? Probably not. Most Americans don't read dietary guidelines. That's the whole problem. What's been advised to the population for decades and what most Americans are eating is night and day. Now, the guidelines do influence some federal programs, so maybe they'll have some positive influence. I hope so. But most people in the population will probably just keep eating what they're eating. People decide what's for dinner based on taste, price, and convenience. And so regardless of what you recommend, if you're not going to make healthy foods cheap and accessible, it's not going to change much. If you find nutrition really confusing and you just want some simple advice, we put together a video covering 3 simple, actionable steps for a healthy diet. So I'll link that right here. Check it out, and I'll see you in there.